Welcome to Waiting on the Trade, a comics book club for people who can't keep up with monthly comics. I'm Matt Ledger.
I'm Patrick Fitzgerald Fleck.
And I'm Callum Smith.
This month we're talking about Superman and the Authority, which may be writer Grant Morrison's final word on both the Man of Steel and DC Comics as a whole. The book features art by Mikhail Janin, Travel Foreman, Evan Cagle, Fico Asio, and a whole bunch of other talented folks. Now, in case you need a refresher, Superman and the Authority chronicles an older, depowered Superman's attempt to revive the spark and idealism of his youth. To do so, Superman forms a new team of superheroes, which has its sights set on problems the Justice League wouldn't dare tackle. You know, he's gonna revive the spark and idealism of his youth, but he's just doing the same thing a different way, though, right? It's the Justice League, but it's not. This'll work this time, right?
We'll get into that, I guess, won't we?
Yeah, we will. But before we get into the discussion, I want to welcome you back to the podcast, Cal.
Hello. Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Podcast exists again.
Yeah, I'm honestly so excited to be here, but also to get to listen to the podcast again, because it is a regular sort of favourite in my podcast rotation. So very, very pleased all over.
Yeah, and we just dropped our first new episode today as we're recording, actually. So that's
Did we?
Yeah, we're talking about cat boobs for a half hour today. If you're checking your podcast
we're back
feed,
at it.
So.
Back in there.
Back on our bullshit very quickly.
Is that Bast related?
Yes, see, Cal knows.
Yeah.
Cal knows about those.
Okay, cool.
You can check into our episode about Sandman Brief Lives to hear how squigged out Mike is by cat boobs. That's
And it's
content you've been
after
missing.
an entire volume about a strip club where all the women are topless. So I'm okay, whatever.
Yeah, no one knows.
Mike Strange.
He's a special boy. But yeah, I've been looking forward to talking about this book since last December. So nearly a year, 9 months, I guess, ago at this point.
We've really stewed in our questions for a while. It's good.
Yes, yeah. And the reason we took a hiatus is because we read this book, Pat didn't like it, and I decided that we were going to take a break from the podcast until Pat changed his opinion. Pat, we've come back from the hiatus.
It's only grown in intensity. No, it's only grown.
I think it's interesting. I'm going to sort of peg this at the top. I think it's probably anybody that reads the book and doesn't enjoy it. I don't think that their issue is with the book itself. I think it is with the broader market forces that shape mainstream superhero comics. I think that's. Sure. I think that is, and I think it's an explicit commentary kind of within the text.
Oh yeah,
itself
certainly.
As well.
Yeah,
I'm excited to get into that, I suppose, in a bit more detail.
I guess that kind of leads, I think, into this discussion I wanted to have off my question, and I think Pat and my questions are both kind of linked, so we might end up taking both of them at the same time. But we can start with mine. So mine was, is this a complete story? And I'm interested to hear your guys' answers first, because I feel like my answer is weird and also very, very ranty. Again, if you've been missing the podcast content, we're going to be back on our bullshit very quickly. I have a long rant that I developed while walking
do you
my
power
dog
rank anything in that?
No, I'm not power ranking. This is a no power ranking podcast.
Oh, jeez.
That part of the format, at least.
Matt, what if at the end of this discussion I asked you to rank different Grant Morrison DC stories as part of the overall?
I was rereading some Grant Morrison JLA the other day, and that is a much more straightforward book in a way that this is not. This book is very much doing things and talking about stuff and very meta in the way you were talking about. And Grant Morrison JLA is just superhero comics for the most part. So
I suppose kind of before touching on whether or not this is a complete story, I think it probably is actually really helpful to talk about the context in which it was written and then published.
Yeah.
And I think Matt, I'm probably correct in saying that this will be included in the show notes. Some of the stuff that Grant Morrison himself has written about this, but I do think that it is super important, and I think it really informs kind of any consideration of like how this story works. So I guess there's a couple of like key beats or like key things that I think that it's worth flagging.
Yeah, this story is like so much a process of sausage making rather than
Yes.
like actually a story that I think we've got to talk about it, because I think it does really shape the way the story turns out and what it's doing. And I think it also does directly feed into why Pat probably does not like this book.
I mean, I could definitely tell this is not a normally like produced comic. Like it has
interesting you
growing
say that,
pains.
Pat, because I think that this is the most normally produced book, but like for better and worse. In that I think
actually.
it is.
Well, I guess when I say normally produced, I felt that Grant Morrison did not have the space he needed to tell the story he wanted. That's what I had a sense.
I would say that's at least kind of true, but it's
Yeah.
also not true at all.
Okay, well,
given what we know about the
I do have a
backstory
second part
stuff.
to my question that may
Yes,
relate
I
to
know.
that.
So in terms of the kind of sausage making, then like I think like the really key beats are. So I think on this podcast before you've talked about his recent run on Green Lantern, certainly the first volume of that, right? So I think that was initially intended to be the final and the conclusion of his Wonder Woman Earth One series were due to be his kind of like final DC works. That was kind of the end of sort of that'd be a roughly 3.5 decade kind of run writing for DC Comics, and that like I don't know if either of you kind of read through the rest of the Green Lantern series. I know it was like very much a kind of your mileage will vary series, but it really did feel like a sort of goodbye, I think, at the end of that series. But then sort of DC kind of editorial within the last sort of year and a half, I think, we're considering a sort of like a line-wide sort of like reshape of stories where they were going to suddenly have kind of characters aging in sort of like real time, and sort of use that as an opportunity to kind of I suppose theoretically rejuvenate kind of like all of their books by kind of having older sort of legacy original versions of characters kind of passing on the baton to sort of younger people because they themselves were sort of too old to sort of carry on in the roles that they traditionally have been in. As part of those plans, sort of the head of DC Comics at the time, Dan DiDio, sort of took Grant Morrison out for lunch, and the way that Grant Morrison tells the story is that he was effectively kind of baited.
Yeah, it's such a good story, and like honestly, from what I know about Dan DiDio, it seems like something he would do. I mean, again, never actually met him, but like the different interviews and stuff he's given, and like seeing him at conventions and stuff, like it seems exactly like something Dan DiDio would do, where he'd be like, "Oh, you wrote like one of the most like wholesome, like pure takes on Superman, where like he's only here to help humanity and that's all he wants to do. Hey, what if you tried to write him as an authoritarian dick?"
I think that the prospect of this, from what Grant Morrison was saying, was distressing enough that he agreed to sort of come out of his not quite retirement or like come back to do just one more thing for DC, writing instead sort of like an older but sort of maybe more thoughtful, progressive Superman who is, I suppose, still handing on the baton, but not
also
as
not evil.
not evil, not authoritarian, not right wing, not fascist, which I think were some of the likely sort of routes that were presented to Grant Morrison for the character by Dan DiDio.
Really?
So then, initially, sort of as again from Grant Morrison's telling, as he was like looking at like how to approach like writing the series, I think it was his like first kind of pass at like these 4 issues were to write it as quite like a tongue-in-cheek, sort of like almost satirical book. So just basically not particularly earnest story, I think, was the kind of initial pass. And his telling is that like it wasn't until he saw Michael Janin's sort of like art that he realized that
he saw Michael Janin's like hunky Grey Temple Superman, and he was like, "Oh wait, that could work though. That could be a real thing, and I don't have to make fun of it."
Yeah, exactly. And then it was a case of kind of reworking something into 4 issues that would act as a kind of thoughtful handing on of the baton, basically, before Grant Morrison actually, really, genuinely, finally, probably sort of finishes.
Let's be
working
real,
for
probably
DC
not.
forever.
DC Comics.
It does have that slight sort of like Miyazaki, Hayao Miyazaki.
Oh yeah,
sort of feel to it,
I'm
right?
retired this
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So also, Pat, that's not actually all of it. There's actually more. So DC was gonna do this big line-wide reboot, right? They called it, like, it was being called 5G. It had been going around in the comics press for a while as like a rumor. But then basically I think it got far enough into the Warner Brothers higher ups where they were like, no, that's terrible, that they fired Dan DiDio and decided to scuttle the whole thing. But they still had this miniseries, and people wanted Grant Morrison to finish it because they thought it was going to be good, and also they figured they could still use it. So they still did the miniseries, even though the thing it was meant to like launch and tie into didn't exist anymore.
So Warworld isn't a thing, is what you're
It
telling
is a
me.
thing, though,
It
because
is a thing,
they
but-
retooled it so it actually does tie into the plans for what became Infinite Frontier instead of 5G. This is why you don't like this comic, Pat.
Do I hate the comic book industry? Is that just the thing that I'm
I mean, you
writing
don't
right
hate the
now?
comic book industry. You might dislike the mainstream monthly superhero comic book
Yeah, it is.
genre.
And I think, to be fair, I think that this book has a similar level of disdain for that. I think
It does,
we
right?
might get onto it later, but I think that the kind of sign off between Superman and Brainiac, sort of towards the end of this.
Oh my god,
story
that's my
feels-
favorite scene in the entire story.
It's phenomenal, isn't it? But it does. I think the strong sense of having outgrown something that is just interested in repeating the same cycles in a not particularly imaginative way feels like, I mean, barely even a metaphor for presumably how Grant Morrison may feel about sort of working with DC or big superhero corporate comics.
And so here's my answer to, is this a complete story? I'm going to take off the rant because we just dovetailed for a while anyways. My answer is no, it's not a complete story, but it was
That's
never
the
meant
correct
to
answer,
be.
Yeah.
Like, straight up, it has a to be continued, obviously. But like, it's also got what Grant Morrison called like a Marvel post-credits scene too, of like talking about Light Ray, which I don't think has actually been followed up on at all since this. Like, it was never meant to be a complete story. It's
like a dark side thing, right? That Light Ray is.
It should theoretically be, but again, who knows? But like, it's a thing that's pretending to move the Superman story into a third act, well knowing that it can never do that. Written by a writer who's been stuck in that second act for the last 33 years or whatever we decided. So no, it's not a complete story. It's not really meant to be. It's just supposed to be like one last Grant Morrison idea bomb and commentary on the superhero cycles, and then a mic drop and a walk off the stage.
I think one of the things that's really interesting to me about like the timing of this book as well, in terms of when it first came out, is we are I think across sort of DC and Marvel in particular, there is currently a sort of a real crop of sort of younger artists and writers who have very, very, very clearly come up reading Grant Morrison work.
Yeah.
And across so many different books at the moment, people are picking up on Grant Morrison's concepts from Batman, Justice League, X-Men, all the rest. And
I'm actually just thinking about it, right? Like, Batman of Zur-En-Arrh, or Zur-En-Arrh, however you want to say it, like, is back this month. Cassandra Nova is a member of the X-Men right now.
Yeah. Yep. And just I think it's interesting looking at this as kind of like a handing on of the baton, because on the one hand there are clearly so many people that are really receptive to that, in terms of that are in creative positions at DC and Marvel at the moment, and who are really interested in doing that. But I think it's fair to say, even though there are some really fun examples of people using Grant Morrison created ideas in comics at the moment, nobody is just burning through interesting new ideas in the way that Grant Morrison did, or nobody is creating their new stuff in the way that Grant Morrison did, with a possible exception of Jonathan Hickman, I would say. But I think that's. But even then, I think Jonathan Hickman is very clearly indebted to Grant Morrison as well, right? Like the use of the world in the concept of the world, the sort of like artificial time environment that came up all the way through his recent X-Men sort of stuff is a Grant Morrison creation. And so even Jonathan Hickman, who I think is probably the biggest, boldest like idea generator at the moment, is still absolutely using tools that were left by Grant Morrison. And I think it's reading this book, I did feel like it's not a complete story because it can't ever be like a mainstream, like this was like an in canon. This isn't like an Elseworlds or like an alternative reality. This was like in the canon of mainstream DC continuity when it came out. And I find it sort of simultaneously like knowing that like Grant Morrison, even throughout this sort of 4-issue series, is still just like churning through and tossing off ideas that other people will probably continue to use for the next sort of decade or two. But I don't see anybody else like even remotely coming close at the moment anyway to sort of actually picking up that baton in a meaningful way and sort of coming up with entirely original stuff themselves.
Yeah, which I mean, this isn't entirely original. Like, it's picking bits and pieces from other stuff, right? Like, The Authority is a pre-existing concept.
Yes.
Like, Midnighter and Apollo are from there. Like, Manchester Black was made in, gosh, was that the early 2000s?
Yeah, I think it was.
So, this is also a mishmash of, I don't know, I think what you said of it being, like, the best and worst of superhero, like, comics, how they work, is a really good description of it. Because I think it, like, I actually did find it really fun, but like it definitely doesn't quite get to do the things it wants to do, I think, and you can tell. Although it does get to do a few things that are really fun. But Pat, you have not talked in a while, so I'm going to make you answer my question. Is this a complete story?
I mean, surprising no one, I will say no. No, it is not a complete story. And it's good to have the context that you guys have given, but I mean, just reading the story itself, it just feels like it's an opening. Like we just got introduced to all the characters in the middle of the last issue.
Right, the team is only assembled at the very end. They haven't actually really, quote unquote, done anything.
And like the big, like there isn't, it built to nothing basically. Like the Ultra Humanite is gonna blow up his brains, I guess, on the planet. And
except he didn't. I was actually like,
and then he didn't.
Like, that didn't really happen.
And then all of a sudden, it's not Ultra Humanite, it's Brainiac, and nothing. Brainiac doesn't do it. He monologues, and they have a nice conversation back and forth, and that's the end of the game. It's like, what am I? What was the point of this?
I think that's kind of why. I mean, I would be really. I think I'm really happy that the version of the story that we have is, I think, like it has a lot of like really earnest kind of beliefs in it, or like expressions of ideas and all the rest. And I think it has sort of quite a romantic heart in the sort of non like romantic isn't like a sentiment towards superhero stuff in general. But I think you really can still see maybe the DNA of a slightly more mean-spirited kind of satirical version of this, like still in a lot of the ideas. And I think some of the stuff with like the how sort of pointless or not pointless but inconsequential a lot of the sort of big beats, particularly with Ultra Humanite and Brainiac, I think that is absolutely intentional, and like that, which has no bearing at all on like how satisfying or kind of engaging sort of it might be for people. But I think it is at the very least, I think it's wholly intended that their plans, their sort of schemes are
just like sort of don't matter.
Yeah, and that they're kind of beneath the interest of Superman ultimately. And I think, again, without wanting to sort of put words in somebody else's mouth, it feels like it's also a signaling of this is beneath the attention of Grant Morrison at that point as well.
Just kind of over
it.
Yeah.
I'm just. So what is Superman like? What is his lofty goals now that weren't his lofty goals before? Like, I was confused why all of a sudden he's like, oh, we were just so naive in the JLA. We wanted to do good, but by doing good, we weren't doing good. And now we'll do true good by not worrying about Earth, but
yeah, that's where it falls apart a little bit, honestly, for me. Is like,
I'm just like, why is it? What?
Together
What are you
team,
talking about?
and their first mission is to go off world, not actually impact Earth at all.
Yeah, I'm just like,
So
okay.
I think there's a couple of things there. I think in terms of the sort of I don't know, the regret or the sort of the desire to kind of change direction from I suppose what this version of Superman had been doing for the decades sort of previously. I think that does work in the sense that I think it's within the text, and I think it just works as an idea in general that there was maybe a sense of complacency or just like stasis about it was just about gathering together all of the most sort of like obviously virtuous and powerful people, and then just sort of hoping that would be enough. I think that's a rich idea. I think that there's a lot of like interesting things to think about with that. The kind of the sort of the complacency that can come with just sort of feeling as though you're a good person and you're powerful, and that's enough maybe to like then have other people following your example.
And like I actually sort of like the commentary on how it's sort of talking about how the superhero stories have changed since their inception too.
Yes.
Like Superman used to be like a very socially progressive, like took real world actions, like beat up people beating their wives sort of guy, and now like he just gets into fistfights with Brainiac, and so for him to recognize that in text is actually really cool. But I agree with Pat that like by the end of it, he's basically just doing the same thing. I don't,
So like he starts off saying we need to do something different. I'm getting a team together, and then I read a comic book where it feels just like a JLA comic book. Like I don't understand.
So I think the key differences maybe are so one of them is I think within it's about the type of people that are being recruited, right? Like it's not like these are sort of dysfunctional sort of like people that are sort of on the fringes of the sort of super society, people that like I think part of it is about sort of Superman being able to prove a point that people can learn to be better themselves, and that it is about actually sort of developing the sort of the hearts and minds of people, as opposed to just finding things where you can punch sort of problems into submission. I think that's why the choice of Manchester Black is like sort of the sort of secondary protagonist of the book is effective, because he is just a repellent little shit.
Really sucks, right?
And so
like he's
just
the fucking worst.
Like a slight change in him is, that, for me, that works really well. In terms of like at the end they're going off to sort of War World to presumably to sort of try and affect large scale social change to a whole planet. I think that's where it kind of, to me, it speaks to the limitations of comics as a medium, because
definitely is, right?
I think that this is something that Grant Morrison talks about in some of the writing that they've done on this series. So two key points, I suppose. One of them is they were sort of recognizing that you can't really do a story where Superman and allies fix all problems on Earth, and that's it. Like there's no sort of problems that we recognize from our everyday lives able to be present in sort of DC Comics anymore, because systemic change has actually happened. And so like part of it was like recognizing that there are commercial pressures that prevent that from being the case. I think the other thing was this was something that where Grant Morrison was talking to Philip Kennedy Johnson, who was writing sort of the main Superman book at the time as well, and they had a story that they were trying to build up to with Superman going to War World to liberate that, I think, from Mongol.
Yeah.
And so again, it is just the slightly grim, again, just everything being this treadmill where nothing ever changes, nothing ever moves on, and like it was just tying into, okay, well, what's the next book that somebody writing Superman wants to write? Okay, cool. I'm going to just
it's kind of bowing to the pressures of all of the baggage we were talking about at the top of like. At the start, this was supposed to be something that was feeding into a mainline DC universe that was really, really changed, and now it's just like, oh, Superman's leaving the planet, and that's like the change. So
it can only be on another fictional planet,
right? Yeah, like he's got to go somewhere else if they're going to do something planetary scale, right?
Yeah.
But to be fair, like for as much as this book shifted around and DC's overall plans shifted around, like they did a decent job of tying these two books together, because like. This Superman looks like he does in here, and main comic Superman still looks like main comic Superman, and eventually things start to actually match up in a way that the story makes sense, which is really well done for as sort of disparate as it seemed like the things were at the start. So I think Superman and Manchester Black coming into contact with each other, and Superman's like idealism, even his like slightly jaded idealism in this, able to like tweak that cynic's heart in Manchester Black, also feels a little bit meta to me. Of like, Grant Morrison was going to write this book in this like really weird sort of farcical way, and then ran up into like hunky dad Superman. It was like, well, shit, that's good though. Dang it, he got me again, that Superman. He's still good.
Well, there's, there's again, not just to keep sort of quoting things that Grant Morrison has written about this, but like he's spoken quite eloquently, I think, about if you're given the chance to write Superman or sort of any of these big characters, like it is sort of, there's kind of a responsibility to treat that, to not take it sort of seriously necessarily, but to sort of be thoughtful in like how you use those characters, and not just to sort of like bow to a sort of cheap cynicism that doesn't really advance anybody's understanding of anything at all.
Yeah, or do stunts for stunts' sake, right?
Yeah, I think that there's something really interesting to me in the way in which this Superman is sort of maintaining, like reassessing sort of their own politics and the role that they can have in the world. I think there's a section where they talk about, where I think Manchester Black is expecting the Superman to sort of hark to things were much better in the past. Gosh, like isn't it a pity how far we've fallen?
Yeah, I'm actually on that page right now, because that's the page I was thinking of when I was talking about those two running up against each other too. Like, it's not that Superman's not static in this. He changes a little bit, and like changing a little bit is about as much as you could get sometimes in in mainstream continuity. So yeah, he's talking about how, like, as far as he can see, young people like his son are more responsible and serious about social issues than we ever were. And then he's talking about how his no-kill rule isn't like, I'm an old fuddy-duddy and I don't want to kill people. He's like, you're better than that. And also, people can't change if they're dead.
Yeah.
It's a great way of
I think that's an
explaining
interesting idea. Yeah. But at the same time, it does, like it. Pat, I think that the kind of bits that you're running up to, I think that they're absolutely there and real. But I don't know. I think that they are symptoms of how does it work when you are writing a product at the end of the day. This is something that has to be able to be reproduced and then passed on to the next creative team and the next creative team after that, and it has to it's, I don't know, it's an interesting one in that respect. I think
tricky also, I feel like, in that the volume I have at least is like a nice hardcover volume. It just says Superman and the Authority on it. It's issues 1 to issue 4. Like, there's no Superman and the Authority volume 2. There's not a series that follows it. Like, if you just grabbed it off a bookstore shelf, you would think like you were getting a story.
I've been bamboozled.
But no, you've been bamboozled.
I'm jumping straight from All-Star Superman to this.
That's actually really interesting to think about. I feel like, of like this, one of the questions I was thinking about, but I think we might get into it later, is like, how is this Superman in conversation with Grant Morrison's other versions of Superman too? But I think we'll probably get into that when we get into Cal's question.
In terms of like whether or not this is a complete story, I mean, I think that probably also maybe ties into Pat's question, but like, I think. I suppose just like the last thing I want to say on whether or not this is a complete story. I think this does. I think it does function as a, like, you can identify a beginning, middle, and end of this story. In terms of just like basic characteristics, like things, the situation, the characters are different at the end of these 4 issues, and that is the case. But I think I think it is an intentional. I don't know. Yeah, just sort of commentary on how it's not really possible within this format to tell a story that has a finite ending.
To have an ending, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it feels like a prologue, but that's because it was designed.
I mean, it kind of is at this point, yeah.
Yeah.
I will say though, before I let us get off this, the real ending of the story is when Superman just pieces out on Brainiac. It says I don't have time for this though.
It's
good.
it's really good, isn't it? And like it did after kind of reading these sort of 4 issues. There was a period where I thought I was probably done just reading superhero comics, because that finalization with Brainiac felt like such a not a damning. I don't think there's like a viciousness in it, but it felt like such an indictment of reading variations on the same story again and again and again and again that it took me a little while to sort of see another superhero comic after this that I felt like I could really engage with or like emotionally invest in. And even now, that's like, it's a very limited band. I'm effectively just reading Kieran Gillen X-Men stuff at the moment, because I'm enjoying his voice kind of within that at the moment. But I think, this, I don't know, it did something in my brain, that final conversation where I was like, oh yeah, maybe I can also peace out.
I mean, there's a reason my indie shelf is growing faster than my other shelves at this point. It's because like I've got 2 almost full bookshelves of superhero comics, and like you got to work pretty hard to get to something I haven't seen at this point. So I do really appreciate still when stuff gets there, and I think my bar is probably lower than yours, Cal, because it's always been lower than yours on that sort of stuff. But yeah, I kind of agree. Like I just really love that moment. And I don't think it's an indictment so much as like we could also be doing so much more. That Dan Didio 5G timeline where characters are actually allowed to like age and change.
Yeah.
It sounds terrible, honestly, from what I've read of it. Like it sounds like some of the ideas in it were just not great. But the actual concept of basically turning the DC universe into more of like a manga thing where it starts at one point, goes to another point, there's a linear progression, and it's allowed to do that. I kind of dig that, though, so I don't know. That would have been interesting, but we do not live in that world. We live in the world where Superman and the Authority are going to go practice on Warworld before they're allowed to enact real change on Earth. And spoilers, they probably won't be allowed to enact real change on Earth anyways.
I think my problem is I read it on a surface level, and I didn't dive deeper, partly because I didn't want
you
to.
Shouldn't have to. Also, like that's not a failing on your part, right? Like if you pick a book off the shelf, like and you don't enjoy it, like you shouldn't be required to do homework to enjoy the book, which I think is a common criticism of Grant Morrison's stuff in a way. And I feel like I'm also not entirely
required.
Yeah, I'm not entirely qualified to address it because I've done a lot of I just do a lot of the homework. Like without prompting, so I don't know.
I mean, that may be true, but this is my least favorite Grant Morrison comic that I've read.
Beating out the Green Lantern Volume 1.
I was going to say, I also wasn't a big fan of that one either, but yeah, I would think the Green Lantern one had more cohesiveness for me, because I know and understand the Lantern Corps much more than I do Superman. Who is maybe my least favorite DC hero?
How dare you?
I don't know. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, Pat, does that kind of segue quite neatly then into?
Yeah, I was going to jump into
your question.
Yeah. So my question is, I guess I had 2 parts to my question. We'll see if we get to the second one, which I'm sort of getting to. But no, my question was whether or not you guys think comic books should create a kind of accessibility rating that they could, I don't know, put on the front cover of, I don't know if you could do single issues, because it would be hard to like rate if an issue itself is accessible or if the entire like
run or
a trade. Yeah, like this story is, you need to know to get a decent idea of what's going on. You need to have this much knowledge of Superman or related comic books to get the amount of satisfaction we think you should get out of this.
So I don't think there's any good way to do it, but there are things that have been tried, I guess.
But yeah,
I
just
think-
like a
I
color
think
code or something.
There's a couple of things. I think because like it is, I think it's really subjective, and I think
Yes.
this is maybe less and less of a common experience. But I think probably for our generation, if you started to read comics in single issues, you almost certainly just picked up your first introduction to an ongoing series was just picking up a random issue, not necessarily about sort of jumping in via trades, because they were still, that was still sort of, I don't know, coming in as a strong part of the the comic book market. I think sort of 20 years ago. But the first, I'd already read some Grant Morrison comics in trades at this point, but the first single issue of a Batman comic that I ever read was Batman 666, which is like such a bizarre point to join in on that story, where it's all about like a future version of Damian Wayne sort of like having like an almost incomprehensible kind of adventure in Gotham's future.
Yeah, in future Gotham, where the devil is real.
Yes, yeah.
Oh.
And I mean, it's a phenomenal issue just in and of itself. But I think like there was something really appealing to me at the time. Maybe just because of where I was in my life, I had a lot of free time to think about comics and to think about characters and stories and all the rest. And there was something quite appealing about reading something and being like, I really don't. I think I'm probably getting about 25% of this, but I would like to find out more. And then like that. So,
right.
So I think that an accessibility guide. I don't know how it would account for that experience.
Comics are designed to, like, you're supposed to say, well, who is this character? Like you threw this character at me, I don't know who, and you look up the character and like, oh, there's a whole other comic run that I could read, and I'm going to buy those comics now. Like that's intrinsic to the comic book like world, right?
Yeah,
it's designed to work that way.
A feature, not a bug, right? Like it's supposed to be a thing that draws you deeper into.
It's starting to bug out on me, though.
Yeah, I know. I think for you specifically, it is often more of a bug than a feature.
I think also like an issue, like potentially an issue, and there are pros and cons to this being something that is in comics, but it used to be much more common to have like a little note from the editor in a panel saying, "Find out more about this."
So even in this book, actually, they talk about stuff with kryptonite a few times that I have no idea what it is. Honestly, like I have no clue. I've got nothing, and like I didn't look it up, because I didn't really feel like I needed to know. But like,
no,
I did question it. I did say like, oh, I don't know what's going on with that, but. So yeah, a nice little editor's blurb would have been nice there.
I think again, this feels to me like something that is an issue with Marvel and DC comics published on a monthly basis, where I think that increasingly they're not that interested in being accessible. I think that you get sort of like little. There are separate ways to break into, or there are separate ways that DC and Marvel want you to get into their comics if you're interested in coming in as a new reader, and that that'll be things like, I mean, DC at the moment has like Black Label, and they recently had Earth One as kind of like ways to sort of, and like recently the Marvel universe had the Ultimate Universe, where they had separate entry points for people that wanted to be like, okay, I get the basics of this character, but I don't have an interest in sort of like unpicking 30 years of alluded to continuity.
Yeah, but the joke there, by the time you get 24 volumes through Ultimate Spider-Man, you still can't. It's still inaccessible.
Oh yeah, 100%. But like I think that's it seems to be less and less the case that there's even those kind of concessions of like alternate jumping on points for people, and I think it is a huge issue. I think it's a problem for superhero comics.
It might just be that I'm, like Matt was saying, been tainted by the independent comic book scene, and I'm used to just having a story that can be like very long, but it's enclosed. It doesn't need to leave open ends to hand off to another creator to do whatever they're going to do with it. Which maybe I'm going to say something creative. Maybe we should just stop doing that. Maybe the mainstream should just like, we're just going to tell awesome stories about the characters you love. Doesn't need to there's need to be continuity.
All right,
these characters
Black
at this
book
point.
next time is what Pat's telling me. DC actually does really well with that, and Marvel does not. DC does a really good job of saying, like, hey, here's a cool story. It's by creators you like. It's a one-off. Like, here it is. And they'll do those alongside their, like, normal monthly books. Marvel doesn't really do that. Marvel just publishes the books, unless I'm forgetting
weird,
something. Yeah.
You sometimes get strange little pockets where it feels like things can just operate on their own rules, right? Like I know that you talked about Squirrel Girl before on the podcast. Like that feels like it exists in its own. I mean, like it is officially mainstream Earth 616 Marvel, but it feels as though it is such a singular voice and creative team on that book that it feels like an entirely coherent, complete, sort of story that you get within that thing. But like it's so rare to find examples like that.
Yeah, that one's like so rare actually that they did actually kind of do the one-off graphic novel thing for it. Like they gave them Squirrel Girl beats up the Marvel Universe as like a single unit of story. Like that's how rare that is for Marvel. That's literally the only example I can think of.
Yeah. I mean, you get a few other things as well, like Vision, I think is probably a good example. Hawkeye by Matt Fraction. Sorry, Vision by Tom King. And, oh God, who does the art on
that? Gabriel Walta for most of it, I think.
Yeah. And then, Hawkeye with Matt Fraction and David Aja. But like, again, it feels so odd whenever it happens.
Yeah.
And I think it's also probably telling as well that it tends to happen with properties that are seen as being less, I'm doing finger quotes right now, less valuable as well, where people are allowed to just do something a little bit risky or sort of a bit more unconventional. I think that's one of the things that I find interesting about this book is that I think that they are I think that Grant Morrison is pushing things as far as they can within, whilst also like being really explicit in acknowledging the limitations
that
of
there
the
are
medium
commercial
in which
rules that the ship must be steered within.
Yeah.
Looking at this book, I'm just comparing the two, which may not be fair, but this Superman and the Authority versus All-Star Superman, I would say All-Star Superman is much more accessible than this.
Yeah, would 100% agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Although even that's like an interesting one. I can remember my friend Kato that I used to live with in Australia. I can remember really excitedly lending her All-Star Superman, assuming that it would be like an absolute slam dunk. And I can remember being like baffled, but like understanding it very quickly when she, having read it, she was like, "Yeah, I thought it was okay, but like I don't know any of these characters or concepts, and this was very, very confusing for me to read."
Yeah, so I wouldn't give Also Superman like the highest accessibility rating. It wouldn't get green. Okay. It would get like orange. But I definitely think Authority would get a lower accessibility rating than All-Star Superman.
No, I think that's fair. Does is there a link between? Do you want a story to be more accessible? I suppose it might sound like a question, but is that linked to enjoyment for you?
I mean, at times, I guess it depends on if I'm interested in the source material. Like I'm sort of being. I love the new X-Men run that Grant Morrison did. It's like probably one of my favorite comic book series. And that's just nonsense all the way through. That's just X-Men doing X-Men stuff to like 100 degrees. So like I loved that and I didn't love this. And it might just be that I don't like Superman to the extent that I like the X-Men. So when the X-Men did zany things and all of a sudden there's like a mutant that's going to blow up the sun or whatever in that series, like, oh, I'm here for that. And in this one, when like the Phantom Zone's going to explode, all of a sudden I'm like, what the fuck? I don't care. Why is this here? Yeah, so it might just be that I like X-Men more than Superman. So
I also think that X-Men series is a little bit more, and this is going to be weird, but like it's a little bit more like understandably mainstream, which is a weird take for that X-Men series where they all wear black leather, right? But like, it's got most of the characters in it are like your faves. Like it's Wolverine, it's Cyclops, it's Jean, it's Beast, it's the Professor. Like Storm shows up.
That could be too. So like when interactions between them, I understand where it's coming from.
And Manchester Black and two new characters we created for this story. Like, so I mean that could be part of it also.
For sure. Yeah, I think I never know with Grant Morrison because I don't know enough about comic books to know if is this a Grant Morrison original or is he pulling someone from the 70s that I've never heard of.
Sure.
It's usually at least a little of both.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Keeps you on your toes.
Like, even the new characters in this are not new characters. Like, one of them is a Flash from a parallel Earth who's wearing the wrong costume, and one of them's take on a Jack Kirby character.
Yeah, the OMAC. I really like the OMAC in this, but it is even then. Like, I mean, like, I don't think anybody even refers to them as OMAC.
Yeah,
within...
it's Mac throughout the entire thing, right? I think.
Yeah.
It's called OMAC, or they're called OMAC once.
Okay.
Oh,
like Manchester Black, I think.
Right. That makes sense. But yeah, I mean, at the risk of kind of like doubling the length of this podcast,
whatever.
it really reminds me of sort of the like. It made me think so much about all of the stuff that I really, really enjoyed about House of X and Powers of X, the recent sort of Jonathan Hickman sort of relaunch of X-Men, which was, I mean, I really like X-Men comics, but I think mainly I've only really, really read Grant Morrison's new X-Men run on that, and then like a few other kind of like series around it, but like from the last couple of decades as well. But like that's like the main thing that I'd read, and like so going through House of X and Powers of X, like lots of it is sort of like stands by itself, is just like throwing out new interesting ideas, great. But loads of it as well is like, okay, well here's this character Exodus. Do you know about Exodus? I had absolutely no idea who that was. Even like Moira, I had like a really sort of tangential. Moira McTaggart had like a really loose.
You watch the cartoon, you got to know. Come
on. I think, as somebody that lives in Scotland at the moment, I think like I'm almost definite that, based on what I know about the accents in that show, I think
you shouldn't go near it. Yeah, probably.
with Moira McTaggart, I'm absolutely sure.
You should go read the original like Chris Claremont stories where Moira shows up, and you'll love it. I'm sure, Cal. You're gonna be really happy about it.
It stirred something similar in me where, like, I mean, I was so just engaged with the story and enjoying the ideas as much that, like, yeah, whenever there were things where I was like, okay, I've got absolutely no idea if I should know, sort of like what Exodus's sort of whole deal is. This particular, or like Nimrod, like, you know, one of the big antagonists in the House of X, Powers of X thing.
Yes.
You know, I sort of vaguely recognized them, but I couldn't, like, I'd never read a story before with Nimrod. I don't think. I think maybe there is just something about like different. If you're buying into like the core premise, like it builds up a tolerance for the less accessible stuff. Like it feels like there's maybe like a balancing act that will be an individual thing within each kind of reader potentially.
That's true and fair, because I did the same thing when I read House of X, Powers of X. But I'm trying to think, are those characters? No, because there's nonsense in House of X. I was going to say
so much nonsense.
I was going to say, do those characters, like, are they introduced and explained enough in the course of the story that you don't need necessarily to know?
I think from our secret discussion about House of X and Powers of X with Kat, I will tell you they were not for at least one reader.
That's fair.
Again,
that's fair.
It speaks to how like it's a very individual thing based on like what your tolerance for bullshit is and your like level of background knowledge on the specific, oh god, what a word, property. How much do you know about this corporate IP?
Your brand awareness, yeah.
At the moment, like, I mean, for the last few years, I think I've been sort of switching more and more into reading sort of manga, just like really, really enjoying exploring like the enormous kind of like breadth and variety of like different manga series that there are out there. And at the moment, kind of the sort of the project that I've set myself is to catch up on every issue of One Piece before the series sort of theoretically concludes in the next, I think, like the next year or so. And so I'm about, I think I've just passed like the 400 issue mark within that.
You got a ways to go,
about
right?
1,000 or something like that. That's done over the last sort of like two and a bit months, I think. And like I'm having the time of my life reading it. I think it's so much fun. But I was thinking the other day about like for a series like that, I was trying to work out whether or not its continued kind of success and commercial viability relied on people like me sort of seeing enough of it in the ether and being like, okay, I'm gonna have to start at issue 1 and then jump in, because like the further into it gets, I'm like, this is great, but I've absolutely no idea like how anybody that picked up an issue of Shonen Jump would sort of like lock in with what was going on. And that's that's a series that has the benefit of a consistent creative team behind it over its sort of 25 years.
Yeah, and
publication.
linear progression through one book, as opposed to
the
Superman the Authority miniseries, which then goes into Action Comics, which then goes into like the Superman War World special or whatever. I think is what it's going to actually get included. So, anyways.
And so I guess I like just thinking about that, that the importance of the role of accessibility. I mean, like it does feel like maybe there are just certain stories that are kind of off limits, like within like you can't. You either have to make a trade-off between sort of telling a story that progresses, that has a sense of progression in like a wider kind of context in the the comics line that it's in, or making something that's accessible. And I don't. Yeah, I just I was reflecting on the fact that like the odds are just so wildly stacked against Grant Morrison or whoever else to try and sort of create anything like that is like that plays with ideas or toys that have been kind of put down, but also doesn't require Wikipedia to be on hand to just sort of decipher, okay, who's this, why are they there, blah blah blah.
Sure,
it's hard. Yeah,
I think part of my other issues with the Authority is it's just the breakneck pace of it. The fact that it could just be, I was telling you guys, I was hoping I could go back and reread some of the new X-Men or All-Star Superman, but then I remembered they're all in boxes and I don't know where they are right now, so I didn't get to read that. I did read Klaus. I read the first volumes of those.
Nice.
Which I enjoyed.
Yeah.
it's good, isn't it?
It is.
I reread it every Christmas at this point.
There again, all you need to really know is like a general idea of like Christmas mythology. Like,
I think that that might be part of it. Is like
Krampus. Do you know
this one's for me and Cal? Like this one's for like the people who've been following Grant Morrison's career for the last. I mean, I haven't obviously because I'm not quite old enough to have done it, but like for the last 33 years or whatever in DC Comics, like this one's the like deep cut final track for the fans sort of deal is maybe the problem.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of my problem is like it was disaster after disaster after disaster. Like there wasn't any time for the characters to breathe. Like there's 1 or 2 pages of them sitting around the table and talking, like when Enchantress gets saved.
Yep.
It slowed down for just a second. I was like, oh, finally, maybe we can just like talk. That didn't last very long. Yeah. So I just like, I didn't like the fact that they talked about Nat, and the next thing was that awful 4-page her fighting the internet. Which, oh my god, I hated that so much. It's too much, you guys.
If you hate that one, Pat, I will give you an issue of Batman Incorporated about Internet 3.0, which is like, it's so much worse than this. Like,
that is, I like for as much as I will sort of go to the mat for Grant Morrison, that is rough.
That was bad.
It had the feel of, whenever they try to show like gaming on a like, I don't know, Law and Order or something like that. It's
yeah.
Look at this, I'm a hardcore gamer. Oh, it's like, what are you playing? What is this? Oh, it hurts me.
Is it? It's like hacking in Swordfish, where Hugh Jackman's typing and trying to assemble the cube. That's how it made you feel.
Just like stop.
Yeah. I mean, I really. You kind of touching on something there that I do actually really like about this book, which is the shifts in kind of like tone, and like obviously they're getting different artists for like the different kind of side stories where you're sort of introduced to other prospective team members. And I really enjoyed, like, I had such a good time with each of those, because it felt like the thing that I'm always just, maybe I'm too impressed by, or too easily impressed by this, but it felt like the type of thing where Grant Morrison was dipping into like 4 pages or so of a story each time, being like, yeah, sure, I could do a a silly, light-hearted sci-fi comic about fighting literal manifestations of terrible behavior on the internet, or the stuff with when you meet Apollo and Midnighter, where it's like, yeah, sure, I could absolutely out Warren Ellis in terms of a cynical, hyper-violent techno thriller thing, or the stuff with Enchantress and June Moon. Yeah, sure, I could do a creepy, weird horror, sort of
here's
story.
This weird horror comic inside your Superman story.
Yeah, I really, for me, I really respond to that. But also, like, I know for a fact that I am too easily impressed by people just sort of suggesting that they of course they could do something if they really wanted to. I mean, it's like Manchester Black in this, actually, isn't it, when he's saying I could lift this up with my brain if I wanted to. But that's kind of like a bit how I feel about sort of some of those shorts, like the short interludes, where it highlights one of my favorite things about superhero comics, which is the limitless potential in terms of sort of settings, ideas, characters, and I think that's like that was something that I responded really positively to as I was reading this, and found like genuinely inspiring, even against all of the limitations that I guess we've already sort of talked about. Yeah.
I don't know, Pat. If you can't laugh at literal like robot manifestations of the internet saying funny no one remembers COVID 1 through 18, I don't know what I can do for you.
Not my favorite.
And then she beat him with a hammer. It was great. It was great. It's what we all wanted to do, Pat.
I don't know. It just feels like the Phantom Zone thing. The fact that, we have 11 minutes before the Phantom. They're going to break out. Manchester Black, quickly. Like, I don't like the fact that Superman is juggling, like, disasters constantly. And, like, he had that light ray is thing in his pocket the whole time as well. Just like, oh God, sure. Yeah, why not?
What else is going on? He's busy. Which also might be part of the commentary.
It stresses me out, man. I have anxiety for Superman.
So on that page where Manchester Black turns around and tries and decides to come back, do you think he just figured out that he was in Alaska? He was like, I have no way to get home. He's not actually a hero. He's just like, I need Superman's my ride.
Also, how did the Solomon Grundy get in there?
Pat,
all of a sudden he's walking by.
You're asking questions that you don't need.
No. It's a pretty big, like, it's the Fortress of Solitude. How did Solomon Grundy, Superhumanite, get in there?
I think if I got this wrong, I might have misremembered this, but I think do they not specify at one point that? I don't know.
I think they hacked the JLA teleporters, but then Superman has already done an end round run around them by like having the authorities' teleportation system that he's using anyways. So I think he let them in essentially. Pat.
Yeah, that's right. Because it turned out that he was tricking Superhumanite so that he could contact Brainiac. Because Brainiac.
Yeah. He's so far ahead of you, Pat. You don't need to be worried for him. He's got it all figured out.
Like, it's the same Grant Morrison bullshit, but I think it's too compact for me. It's hitting too quick.
It's like, certainly could have been a 6-issue miniseries instead of a 4-issue miniseries, but that's kind of the way that Grant Morrison rolls, man.
I think, and like it again, like everybody's mileage on this is gonna vary, but it reminded me of one of the things that probably. I think it probably is my favorite. Is it my favorite? Well, I don't know. Maybe we'll get onto this in a bit. But one of his other sort of like closing chapters on his work at DC was the Multiversity series from.
Which I'm in the middle of reading right now.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool. Well, I think that series has this really breathless pace. And I just really respond to where like every issue it's a distinct, unique crisis. The world is ending in a different way in every single issue. And like
the fact that it's different worlds, am I weird? But that makes it feel a little bit more better to me.
No, I get
it's not the same world going through.
You're at least like jumping from place, like you're going from place to place. And like,
I'm just thinking of a normal person in this world, and like I would not like. How do you live? How does life exist on a planet that is being assaulted with so many? But at least in Multiversity, it's like one planet goes through its like death throes, and then another planet, it's not the same one, dealing with zombies and ancient
I get what
gods.
you're saying.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's entirely fair. But yeah, I don't know. I do think I'm just sort of in the bag for Grant Morrison stuff at this point, and will, sort of, I'm just like happy to be there a lot of the time, which isn't great from like a critical perspective, but it does mean that I often have a lovely time reading his stuff.
You have a good time reading books, I know.
Yeah.
I mean, strange things. I would have said that I was as well, and then I guess
and then you read this.
Green Lantern. And then this sort of made me question. Like, okay, maybe
not all of it.
The
only way you can find out, Pat, is by reading literally all of it, and then totaling it up and having a percentage.
It can't be that much, right? Let's go.
It's only 50+ years of work. How much could there be?
But yeah, I mean, it does. I mean, like there is so much sort of like just quintessential Grant Morrison stuff in this that I enjoy, and I think one of the things that like I don't want to go, I suppose, uncommented, and maybe this probably tie this into the accessibility point as well. I think is that I think that this is a genuinely funny book as well. Like I think there is like a lightness of tone to it that I really really appreciate, and I think that something that I think my favorite Grant Morrison stuff is where it feels earnest but not serious. And there are so many sort of gags in this that I think I will keep coming back to and finding incredibly funny. Some of these play on my own personal prejudices. Like, I think it's incredibly funny that there is that the villain is using Bitcoin and NFTs to sort of pay other people. As somebody that thinks that they are
they'll be worth millions and we take over the world. But wait, you haven't.
I'm like genuinely delighted by stuff like that, and I think it's I don't know, it's
the bit that cracks me up every time is the end of issue 1, and I still just don't get it, but it just makes me laugh every time to watch Manchester Black just keel over after drinking mineral water and throw up on the world. I'm like, what? That is the point actually where I was like, what the hell is this comic trying to do?
It's something like he can't process alcohol.
No, he needs alcohol. He thought Superman was giving him like a glass of wine or something, but it wasn't. It was just water, and he needs. I don't know, man. It's really funny. I don't really entirely get it. I don't think.
But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, genuinely, like the humor across the whole sort of series really works for me. I think.
I did like Eclipso telling what's her name, Light Ray, that she deserved to die because she didn't know who he was.
Yeah, there's something nicely just sort of pathetic about the villains in this as well, which I think works with the idea that Superman himself is moving on to bigger and better things than these guys. But
yeah, even the ultra human just kind of comes off as that person you dumped that just never got over you, right? Like, yeah, dude, you haven't even been in these comics for like 60 years. No one's got time for you anymore.
There's a white supremacist getting his head kicked off.
Yeah, like there's so much to love, Pat.
I hear you, but at the same time,
I get it.
That's fair. So that maybe does work as like a kind of like a nice bridging point as well, I guess, like in terms of like the tone of this book into the sort of discussion question which I had, which is like it's really interesting to me that the kind of dominant form of Superman or Superman adjacent figures in the popular cultural landscape at the moment is I suppose like the authoritarian, fascistic, hyper-violent versions of Superman that Dan DiDio was threatening Grant Morrison with before this book was written. And like, well, I suppose just kind of as the first part, like I'm interested to like hear both your thoughts on like why that is so ubiquitous at the moment. With, I mean, obviously Invincible, the comic series, had been out for quite a long time, but like finding real success as like an animated show at the moment. The Boys, again, hugely it's not one that I've watched, but I understand it's a big deal, and that in particular the villain of the show, which is What If Superman, but a sociopath,
What is Superman
is
but an ass?
the star attraction of the show. And just oh god,
I mean, there's so many,
what the
right?
video
Like
games
the
called?
Injustice, right? Yeah,
Injustice.
like Injustice
Yeah,
is like actually still been really big to the point where those digital
yeah,
comics went on for like 4
years.
seasons or whatever, 4
Yeah,
years. Like,
yeah.
and then
Which is crazy. Like 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 normal Batman runs, or like just like normal big sort of superhero comics don't
yeah,
run that
can't
long.
even get like
Like
a
that.
year's worth of comics at this point. But the Injustice digital
Yeah,
comic gets to go for 4 years and still be like incredibly popular, and a thing that I see panels from on
yeah.
the internet all the time.
And so yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on like why that version of Superman is the kind of, I don't know, so resonant at the
I mean,
moment?
it sort of resonates with my pessimism that I'm feeling about the
I
world
mean, yeah,
today.
right. It's like everyone's kind of incredibly cynical at the moment, I think.
Yeah, like I mean, it's the whole thing about power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Like the idealized version of who Superman is makes for good comics, but you would always think that in real life, could someone be that selfless with that much power? And I don't more. Is it fair to say it's more realistic to have these quote unquote evil Supermen?
It is
I
fair
don't
to
know.
say that, but I think it's then also missing the point of what a comic book is supposed to be. I guess not all comic
No,
books, but like I don't
sure.
know, like The Boys especially. I wrote a whole thing about like The Boys and why I just can't, just can't with
I can't watch season 2. I couldn't do it.
because like it's so anathema to me of like what the whole concept is supposed to be about that I can't deal with it. I can't wrap my head around it of like it's Superman but he's evil. It's like, but no, the whole point of Superman is that he's the best one. Like,
I think, I mean, like there's a like I've genuinely zero interest in defending the boys. It was a series that like I read and like I'm just never going to go back to, and I don't think it has sort of much substance to it. But like just as a point of clarification, I do think that the Superman in that, it's not about necessarily Superman but evil. I think it's more about what about Superman as a explicit embodiment of the military industrial complex,
this is
because he is
true. Yeah.
Sure.
Yes, I shorthanded.
So I think
And the
there are
show is
slightly
all about
different.
corporations and the power that they have.
But I think, I mean, like I've got. I think, Pat. I think I think your like reading of why it's resonant is. I think that's probably correct. But I think I've also got like an issue with how interesting that is. Like as a thought experiment, because I think ultimately, like, he's not. Superheroes don't exist.
Yeah, right.
Sure,
Like
but
that's
it's a stand-in like
I think.
Ultraman. Is it Ultraman in
Omni-Man, I
Invincible?
think.
I don't
Yeah,
remember.
yeah.
Like they're stand-ins for like the powers that we have no control of in our own life, like the government going to shit and the environment crumbling, the corporations
Yeah.
not stepping up. They're stand-ins for all that bullshit. And
Yeah.
it's sort of cathartic to see are the good guys in those stories fighting these juggernauts, these unstoppable evils. It's like it's us. It's we're trying our best to get those corporations to just stop poisoning our planet, please. So I don't. It's a different type of story, and I think it serves a different purpose.
Yeah, but I think it's also
Yeah.
dangerous though too to keep telling people that like yes, if people had these powers, they would become completely self-interested and use them for their own personal gain and also like not be any sort of like
Yeah.
nice person. Like that's the danger of these stories to me is like and the danger especially of at least with the Omni-Men, the Homelanders, the like all the analogs of like there's so many of these at this point. Like at least with the analogs, it's just analogs. Like that's actually kind of interesting to me of like, okay, here's this archetype who's been established for what, 50, like 80 years at this point. let's shift it a little bit to talk about like what would happen if this happened in the real world. Sure, that's fine. For someone to do that with like actual mainstream monthly comics Superman, like even Injustice Superman, I'm like, okay, it's a parallel Earth. Like we've seen this 80 times and we don't really need to see it again, but it's fine. It's interesting. And people find it entertaining. If you do it in the mainstream monthly Superman books for like any sustained period of time, I think you really screwed it up. So that's why I'm very like, I'm glad Grant Morrison roasted him as bait and like wrote this Superman who knows he's wrong, like looks at the world and is like, we could have done more, but hasn't entirely figured out what that more is yet, to the point where they're going to go do a practice run on War World, right? Like, he knows something's missing and they failed somehow because like they could have made a utopia and they didn't. But like, also, is it their right to just make a utopia? No.
It's I think you kind of touched on one of the things that like that really bothers me about the Superman but evil archetype that's sort of like running wild at the moment, is because I think it is ultimately, to me, it feels like just a colossal failure of imagination on the part of the creative teams behind it. Because I think it doesn't tell us anything about our world to say like, okay, well, yeah, what if
people with
a powerful man
use their power to be dicks? Great? Wow.
Yeah, that's good. I've lived in the world at all. I've got that idea in my head. That's fine. Like, it doesn't. I'm not going to learn more about it by seeing Superman punching somebody's heart out. And like what I've been speaking to my partner Ruth about this recently, that like something that I find myself just like craving so much at the moment in sort of fantasy, sci-fi, kind of superhero fiction, whatever. Just sort of, I suppose, like general fiction that explores other possibilities. Is that it seems like so few people are interested in actually doing the legwork to imagine what a different and ideally better world could be. Like, it is so. I'm so sick at this point of like seeing story set in a post-apocalypse where everybody's horrible to each other, or seeing fantasy set in like a horrible version of like feudal Europe, where everyone is horrible to each other, and like there's so. I just feel really starved for the like people sort of like really taking a stand and saying like, okay, cool, what is a better option? Like, what are things that would lead to actual improvements for everybody? And I think this book does not do that. Like, I want to make it very clear, but I think it is interested in the potential of that, and I think to me it feels like the inability of superhero comics to be the right place to explore that idea is, I think, ultimately why this Superman is telling Brainiac to get lost or grow up at the end of it. And it feels like it is like this story is like the unrealized potential of something that I'm so much more interested in than a nasty authoritarian Superman again. I don't know if either of you have read Planetary by Warren Ellis and John Cassaday. There are loads of reasons why people may not want to read that today, not least which is sort of Warren Ellis is firmly on record as being a creep at this point, and that is more than enough reason not to sort of pick up a copy if you haven't read it. But unfortunately, I think it is actually one of the best explorations of sort of people within a sort of like what we would recognize as a standard kind of superhero universe, sort of deciding that they've had enough of being trapped in this like grim repeating cycle of, I don't know, failures of imagination. And like, I think about the climax of that book all the time, where the analogues, I suppose, to the Fantastic Four are defeated, but like the reward for that is that the world gets to progress. Everything gets to move on. The like sort of like imagination and wonder is kind of like let back in, and like progress is sort of suddenly a possibility again. And I don't know. Sorry, this is. I hope that this hasn't been sort of too incoherent a rant, but like
no, and I think
I've just been thinking about it lots recently as I see people like loving The Boys and like great, good for them, but like it does feel emblematic of something that I'm just like, I could not be less interested in. I was so grateful that in this book, the Superman that we see it feels like directly oppositional to this kind of, I don't know, sort of like collapse in creativity I see elsewhere.
Honestly, I think and I think we talked about this page already, but it really spoke to me too, because I really enjoyed this Superman's faith in the younger generation that was coming after him. Because that's a thing that I think is also, I don't know, again, it feels in short supply to me, of like people believing that the generation after them can improve upon what they did, as opposed to just like things will continue to fall apart instead. Like that was really cool and aspirational to me. And I think it also speaks to, there's no, like, this Superman doesn't want to just like try to assert his will on the world because he thinks that what he does wouldn't be as good as like what his son and his son's generation might do. So anyways, I think that kind of speaks to it also, where in like the authoritarian thing, part of the mindset is that I have this power and I am correct, and the way I'm going to do things is the best way to do things, right? Like, in addition to just being power mad. So that was kind of nice seeing this Superman like reconsidering his own approach, but also not writing off anyone else's ability to do things or even critique the way he's doing things. Like, he does invite Manchester Black onto the team, right? Like, he's trying to change Manchester Black, but I think he's also wants Manchester Black there for the few valid criticisms that Manchester Black has.
I think it's at the end of the first issue of the series where Manchester Black is asking Superman directly, like, well, don't you want to sort of get revenge on the whole world for rejecting, the truth about your truth, your version of the ideal world? And Superman's answer is like, he looks like genuinely confused, where he's just saying like, oh, why would I do that? Yeah, and I really like that. And I think, if I want to sort of continue to indulge like my thoughts on like, is like the potential of this book being a big baton handing from Grant Morrison to anybody else that's going to be writing superhero comics. It sort of feels a bit like that as well, where like, I'm, as much as I love Grant Morrison and their comics, and I love the ideas that they put out and that people are still picking up and using and examining them, I'm so excited for the idea of it still being possible in superhero comics for there to be a whole new perspective and a whole new voice emerging, it being maybe not actually a good thing if Grant Morrison continues to be a big presence in the superhero field, because they will stymie that, to an extent, or like prevent other people from growing themselves. And I don't know, like I'm so excited, or like I really want there to be new, interesting, exciting ideas in superhero comics and in the DC universe, and for there to be completely newer voices and approaches. And I really hope it happens. I don't know that it will. I don't know if it is possible for there to be, a next generation that is able to like radically move things forward. But I think this book makes a good case for why that's important, both sort of within the text of the book, but also in the kind of meta sense as well.
Would you be excited to know that this Superman becomes a shirtless Superman fighting in a gladiator pit on an alien world?
I was thinking about whether or not I would read the Superman War World stuff in preparation for this episode, and I read some reviews of it and then decided not to.
Ooh, interesting.
It did not sound that good. Have you read it, Matt?
Yeah, so I guess before we get into it, do you guys want to do... I didn't actually ask us to come with recommendations of if you like this, you might like this, or if you hate this, you might like this. In Pat's case, I guess. But I do have... I guess very briefly, at least, I will say, just by like happenstance, 2 days ago, I was at the library and they had what I think was actually the second volume of Philip Kennedy Johnson's current Action Comics run. So I grabbed it. And like it's not this, but it's good. Like I enjoyed it. Like it's Superman dealing with a bunch of like political stuff on Earth between Atlantis and the US, which is actually handled kind of adeptly. And then also a ship of Kryptonian refugees that was, I think they had fled Krypton and then Mongol picked them up to have them on Warworld. They arrive on Earth and basically Superman's like, I can't let that stand. And then Justice League's like, well, we're too busy on Earth, and also like that's an entire world. And he's like, screw this, and that's what essentially like where the Authority comes in in that story. Is that basically at the end of the volume I read Superman's about to leave Earth with the Authority, and his son is worried because his son like was in the future with the Legion of Superheroes, and the stories of Superman just kind of stop around this time apparently. So it was entertaining. It was good. Again, it's not this, but I think if you enjoyed this and wanted to keep following the story, I would actually recommend it. Like it's a very well written Superman. Like it's a Superman who I really enjoy, a Superman who is willing to do the right. He's not like a shill. He's not a corporate shill. He's not like America First Superman. Like he's very much just like, I'm gonna do the thing that's correct. Like his answer to the problem between Atlantis and the US is just like, this is my ball now. I'm taking this ball. It's mine. Neither of you is responsible enough to have it. So, and then basically he tells the Justice League, well, like, I'm going to Warworld, so sorry guys. So, yeah, it's enjoyable, and like it continues, I think, kind of this like more interesting and like nuanced take on Superman, where he kind of feels that maybe he's not doing enough, but he hasn't figured out exactly what else he should be doing. So I think it's actually a really nice continuation, and it works in the way that I actually like monthly superhero comics working, where the ball is kind of picked up and taken, and it's at least semi-consistent, and the story is good. So I don't know, Pat. There's an audience for it. I know you're not the audience for it.
God bless them. I mean, if we're doing recommendations, I obviously would just say All-Star Superman, I feel, does I'm going to say, better job at showing a Superman with those positive aspects we were talking about. And again, it's a Superman who's dying, sort of a spoiler, not really. So it's a similar passing of the baton kind of thing, where he's not going to be Superman for much longer.
Yeah, and we didn't really get into my sub question of like this Superman in conversation with other Grant Morrison Supermen, but I think there is a lot, especially with All-Star Superman in this one, where both of them kind of look around at the world and like they're losing their powers, or they have a short time left, and they're like, didn't quite do it, did I? Like, didn't quite nail it. Like I was working on it and did some good things, but like not quite there. And so
there's those quiet moments where like he rescues, was it Megan? Is it Megan who's gonna jump off the building?
Reagan.
Oh yeah.
Reagan, yes, thank you. Which might be my favorite Superman moment ever. Like the quintessential this is Superman. So yeah, I would say All-Star is my preferred Grant Morrison Superman.
Do you have a recommendation?
Yeah, well, I suppose two really. One of them, I think, would be to. Yeah, I suppose there's kind of two different directions that you can go in. Either it's about looking at kind of stuff that is like doing similar things but better, and like obviously with all of the health warnings that I gave before, like I think Planetary looks at a lot of the same ideas as this and is sort of quite fun and is able to take it a bit further because it's in a less commercially viable sort of like superhero property universe.
Yeah, it gets to actually have an ending in the way that you like stuff actually having endings.
Yeah,
endings are nice.
But yeah, like I say, like such a massively caveated recommendation on that one. I think the other direction that I would go though is just to look at this as a examination of like what are the edges of what you can actually accomplish within a superhero book, and to read just something really different. To pick up, like, why do you like try something that is not a superhero book or is not published by Marvel or DC. So I think to that end, I would recommend just anything by Shortbox Comics. This is a publishing company based in the UK that does just really fun, interesting, consistently different, imaginative sort of works, and you can pretty much just like close your eyes, throw a dart, find something that's going to be interesting and is going to be a story that you have not read before. The other thing that I would also recommend is there's a series of books by another publisher called Piao Studios, and a series of books that they've published over the last couple of years called X-Mag. These are kind of like anthology books which are getting together a bunch of different creators like to tell short comic stories based around different themes. So I think there's paranormal romance, cyberpunk, dark fantasy, and the most recent one was mechs, like mech
it was
suits.
the mech one. I remember you sent me that link.
Yeah. And it's just, I think like I've started to really just sort of crave that kind of thing where you read something and like you're getting loads of different ideas, perspectives, creators, styles, and it feels like it is really committed to actually living outside of, okay, but I suppose it feels like stuff by Shortbox and stuff by Piao Studios and the X-Mag books, it feels like that is people who are allowed to practice art as opposed to produce a commodity.
Yeah, it is such like a wild spread of books, which is really cool to see whenever you go, especially, I don't know, like Shortbox I've had a little bit more interaction with. Like I've ordered a few of those at this point, and a lot of them are so wildly different. It's really cool. Like you can get an Emily Carroll.
Emily Carroll.
Yeah, and then also like Alyssa Tremaine, like these two roommates go to IKEA, but it's the labyrinth essentially. Like so it's just like such wildly different stuff. It's cool.
Yeah, and I think that like seeking out that kind of thing feels like a solid follow-up to reading something that is, again, for better and worse, like one of the most corporate comic books that I think I've ever read in terms of what's in it and how it was made. So I think that would probably be actually my main recommendation. Forget that I mentioned Planetary.
Okay, I'll just link people to Shortbox.
Go read something. Yeah. What about you, Matt?
I mean, I think I'll stick with my corporate comics recommendation. I'll just say, if you enjoyed this, follow Superman into Action Comics number 1039, as it says in the back of 1036. Sorry.
It is really funny, isn't it, that they use the original numbering?
It is, right? Like you can't like the volume that it would be in. Like, come on, guys! Like, we could have a whole half-hour discussion about DC's collected editions department, honestly, and how utterly shit it is, but we won't do that. Instead, I think I'm going to thank you guys for this month's discussion of Superman and the Authority. As always, if you want to get in touch with Pat or myself, you can email us at waitingonthetrade@gmail.com. You can also find more comics-related goodness at mattreadscomics.com. This is where I would ask you to say, Cal, if you want people to find you on the internet where it should be, but you don't.
I don't. No, don't do it.
Cal lives in a secret bunker somewhere, and he emerges to do these recordings with us, and we thank him for that.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me on as well. I've really, really, really enjoyed this, and I'm so excited that as soon as this recording is done, I can go and listen to you guys talk about Cat
for about a half hour. Yeah, it'll be a good rest of your rainy afternoon.
But yeah, no, thank you so much for having me on. I've really, really enjoyed this.